still great, but it's not. Ladies and gents, 2014 Porsche 911 Carrera 4S. This is the 991.1 generation. And first off, kudos to Darwin, who just bought this car used for around $80,000 for going with a bright, playful color. I'm tired of seeing all these monochromatic sports cars. The yellow, it's polarizing. Either you love it or hate it. I'm a fan. We've got the yellow paint on the red calipers. And I would actually say that the 991, in my opinion, is the best looking Porsche. The 991.2 specifically, this is the 991.1. And to me, it's just timeless. I think it looks better than the 992. Personally. This is also back when the base and the S and such had naturally aspirated engines. So here we're powered by a 3.8 liter naturally aspirated flat six, making 430 horsepower, 325 pound-feet of torque. This is equipped with PDK, and because it's the 4S, it's all-wheel drive, and in this spec, it weighs a little bit over 3,300 pounds. In terms of options, we have Sport Chrono, as you can see there, PASM with a sport suspension that actually lowers the ride height by 10 millimeters over the regular PASM. Also gives you stiffer sway bars, a different front lip, and rear spoiler comes up a little bit more. We've got Porsche Sport Exhaust. We have the LED headlights as well. And the only mods are really wheel spacers and wireless Apple CarPlay. The car still feels very modern from the exterior. You get to the interior and there is a bit of a difference between 991.1 and 1.2. The steering wheel, I think, kind of ages the car. I think the newer generation steering wheels from Porsche, I think, are perfection. We've got full leather interior with the premium package, which includes the 14-way seats, Bose audio, carbon interior package, and sport design steering wheel. And with that out of the way, let's see if she drives. The thing I love about this 911, actually a lot of 911s, is the dual personality to them. So driving around right now in automatic, no sport or anything engaged, it's comfortable, it's quiet, and then you hit Sport Plus, that engages PASM, the Sport Exhaust, and the whole car just wakes up. Compared to the 992s, it's definitely a lot slower, but it's still plenty quick with over 400 horsepower. Redline almost at 8,000 RPM. Now in this generation, you have McPherson strut front suspension, actually even in the 992s, until you get to the GT3 with the 992. So we'll see how it handles on the lower speed corners when we push it a little bit harder. But I will say, you know, I hear a lot of negativity about the 991 steering because this is when they finally went to electric power steering versus the hydraulic of the 997 prior gen. And it's not the best e-Pass by any means, but it's also not totally numb. You are getting a little bit of information and texture and communication of the front end through the wheel. But I love naturally aspirated engines, so I'm glad that we get that immediate throttle response and the sound in this generation of Porsche 911. Hello, dear. Let's do a pull. It's decently quick, man. Over 400 horsepower, nothing to scoff at. But the shifts with the PDK, with each generation, they keep iterating it and improving it. It's such an amazing transmission, even in this 991.1. Let me actually put it into the manual mode right now. The upshifts, very fast, not quite as fast as the recent gens, but it's so smooth, and when you downshift, the rev matching is just perfect. One thing you'll notice though is between 1 and 2 and between 2 and 3, you get a bit of a torque dip that the newer gens don't have. It's actually more prominent between 1 and 2 than 2 and 3. I'll show you guys later on that straight section. not auto upshifting. As you can see back there, you can elicit a bit of understeer. The owner mentioned he got the 4S, the all-wheel drive versus the 2S, because it has that, it comes standard with the wide body, the wider fenders in the rear, just looks a little bit better. But you are adding a bit of weight, and you're not getting the same level of rotation that you're gonna get in the 2S with throttle input mid-corner. But this car is just so well-rounded. It's very clear as to why the 911 is held up in such high regard, and this thing has held its value really well. It's $80K today in 2024 with 40,000 miles on it, and you're still getting a decent amount of car for that money. It still feels pretty modern. I mean, sure, with the interior, the 991.2 feels much more modern. The steering wheel here is probably the biggest tell. But it drives so well, and the PDK isn't quite as sharp. Even the paddle throws here, they're not as crisp. It's like there's a longer throw to it, and it's not as tight as newer gens, but it's still great. Like, I'm just nitpicking here. This is still such a great, fantastic, well-rounded car. It's actually cool to compare it to the newer generations. We did drive the 992T and S recently, and those cars are much faster, but now they have turbocharged engines. The interiors are definitely a big step up in terms of the design. Do have a few rattles here and there on this 991. The PDK a little bit sharper there, but very much feels more similar than different. You can feel a little bit more of that rear engine nature on this 991 versus the 992 as well. They've dialed it out even more from the 992, but this already feels much more balanced than, say, a 997, because the 997 you can very much feel the rear engine bias, and when you got on throttle, the front end would really lift off and get lighter. But here it's not as much, not as prominent. Interesting. A few slower upshifts there. Again, the PDK is still great, but it's not quite as sharp as in these newer generations. Suspension, I think it's really well dialed in for a vehicle like this. We're going to be doing mostly just street driving. With PASM engaged, it's nice and firm, it's communicative, but still not too harsh, not getting unsettled over the bumps. Really, really impressive vehicle. But for 80K, obviously it depends on your use case. I think if you want a really fun, sporty, daily driver, this just can do the dual personality thing so well. The 4S versus the 2S, for the owner, it was primarily aesthetics, which I respect, man. I mean, aesthetics are important, but the extra weight and not getting as playful mid-corner with throttle input, I would probably prefer the 2S, even though it doesn't look as good from the rear end. By the way, really love this wireless MagSafe charger here. Holds your phone right there. It makes a lot of sense in this car because it's PDK, unless you wanted to actually adjust and do your gear shifts from the gear lever rather than from the paddles. Obviously, you can't really do this with a manual transmission, but really impressed, man. The 911 is held in high regard for a very good reason. I think the 991 it just looks so good. But overall, really impressed, man. I mean, it looks really great, it drives really well. For a 10-year-old car, it's hard to believe it is that old. But I mean, it's the Porsche way, right? They keep just making these small iterations and refinements, so even a car that's 10 years old still feels and looks pretty fresh. My friends, let me know what you think of the 991.1 Carrera 4S with a comment down below. If you want your car reviewed, visit us on jabalandcars.com. Big shout out to my buddy Fenton Sun from the Zygreen YouTube channel for making this review possible. Big thanks to Darwin, the owner. Much love, and I'll see you all in that next one.